Okay, so looking at the Excel functions, right, for creating the pivot table, the first step is just to put the cursor inside the data, right? And here we have the columns and the rows all nicely lined up next to each other. And then we just click on Insert Pivot Table, right, from the menu. And when the screen pops up, it asks you if you want the pivot table in a new worksheet or the existing worksheet. We'll use the new worksheet. And it's also asking you for the dimensions of the data. So the default we have here is OK. So now when I click OK, a new worksheet is created, and on page 2 of the outline, to do the analysis, we basically take these pivot table fields, right, that you see on the right-hand side and move them down into one of the boxes, filters, columns, rows, or values. So what our data involves is different courses, the year that the student is in class, that's an ID number for the student. This is the initials of the advisor, and then the student gave a rating to the for the advisor, 1 through 4, 1 through 5, something like that. And we have one guideline to follow. 100 level classes are for freshmen. 200 level would be for sophomores, not freshmen, right? Or older. 300 level would be for juniors or seniors. 400 level would be only for seniors, right? So if we have a freshman in a sophomore level class, if we have a sophomore in a junior level class, that would indicate an advising problem. So we know who the advisors are, we know what classes the students are in. We're trying to use a pivot table to evaluate how our advisors are doing. So the first way we're going to test that is just to understand a little bit about who's doing what kind of advising. Because in the background information, it also tells us each advisor should have about the same number of students. So if I move the advisor down into rows, you can see I end up with a list of advisors in the table. And then if I move the student down into values, it's summing all the student IDs, which isn't very useful. So there's a little down arrow here next to the word sum. And if you look on the bottom of page 2, move over to the top of page 3, in value settings, I can change it to count, click OK. So now we can see that advisor BB has 34, HM 33, KB 41. Now there's some advisor called SP, he's only got 6, and WW has 150. So seems like we found one possible issue based on the criteria. It doesn't look like all the advisors have the same number of students. But now, depending on how big your pivot table is, you may want to sort. So on page 4, we talk about sorting. When you see the little down arrow, right, notice I can sort A to Z or Z to A. So that's pretty easy to do. But then in count of students, there's no arrow. So what I have to do is put the cursor on one of the numbers, right-click, and then that takes you to the sort. Right, so I put the cursor in one of the numbers, right-click, and now if I sort smallest to largest, if there was a big table, right, you could see 6 is the lowest. And before moving on, I'll just return the sort here to the way it was. So, okay, questions? All right. If you wanted to look at it a different way, right, the nice thing about this pivot table is you can just drag things around. So I'm going to move the advisor from rows to columns. And notice that the style of the pivot table changes. So it's designed for you to explore what is there. That's on the top of page 5, or item number 7 in the outline. Item number 8 asks for the rating of each advisor. So I'm going to put advisor back into rows. I'm going to move count of students out. I'm going to bring rating down into values. And instead of summing, I'm going to go to value settings, average, click OK. I'll go to the numbers and I'll sort smallest to largest. And our poor advisor SP not only advises just a few people, but advisor SP also significantly has the lowest rating of everybody. Anything going through your mind is strictly coincidental, right? So, we can use the pivot table to learn quite a bit. So here's kind of a, think about what the answer might be. I'm on page 6, question number 9. It says, what would you do to figure out the enrollment in each course? And we don't have anything filled in, right, in the handout. So for enrollment, right, you can see in the results that we have the courses are in the rows. And then to get the value, maybe I'll put the students under values, change it from sum to count. And so now I can see we have 29 students in accounting 100, 33 students in accounting 200, and so forth. Okay. Okay with that? All right. Page 7, item 10 says, how many first, second, third year students, et cetera, are advised by each advisor? So now what we're going to do is, instead of just analyzing in one dimension with rows, we're going to have both rows and columns looking at what we're doing. So I want the advisors in the rows, right? I'll drag that down. I want the year in the columns, and I'll leave count of students for the values. And now we can see that BB has 7 first-year students, right? 9 second-year students, for a grand total of 34 students. SP only has first, second, and third years. By the time anybody gets to their 4th year, they've moved on to a different advisor. given the kind of advising that person does. Okay, bottom of page 7 talks about the school prerequisite policy, right? If you're in Accounting 100 course, you have to be at least a first-year student. If you're in Accounting 200 course, you have to be at least a second-year student. So what we'd like to do is look for students, right, that don't comply with that policy. So on the top of page 8, there's one way that we could answer that. I'm going to leave year for the columns, count for the students. I'm going to remove advisor from the rows, and I'll put in the course. And now if you look at this, right, we can see that for first-year students, there's one person in a 200 level class and one person in a 300 level class. It's okay for a second-year person to be 100 or 2, but not 3, right? And then in the third-year column, there should not be anybody in the third year taking a 400 level class, right? So that's kind of interesting. Now we want to figure out who did this. You probably already know, but for audit documentation purposes, we have to include this in our work papers, right? So there's a couple of ways that we could do this. I'm going to drag advisor down into columns, and we can see, right, this first column is always that HN, his first-year students for HN are only in 100 level classes. For second-year students, right, BB has them in 200 level classes. So, but what we can see here is, right, for first-year students, SP has them in both 100 and 200. For second-year students, SP has them in 300s. And for 300 students, SP has them in 400s. So it's no wonder SP gets lousy advisor ratings, pushing people into the wrong classes. So that would be one way we could use the pivot table, right, to identify this. And this result, right, is on the top of page 9. Now, another kind of interesting function, right, is this filter. And so with the filter, I can just select which advisor I want to use, right? So I move the advisor into the filter, and from the little menu here, I can select each person. So in the handout, we talk about HN. And I got it the other way in the handout, right? I got the rows and columns the opposite, but here we can see, right, Accounting 100, 7 first-year people. Accounting 200, 7 people. Accounting 100, 1 second-year person. It doesn't matter. And if you want to see it the other way, right, you can just drag these around, and now we match the handout. So my point is, if we switch this to SP, there's no hiding it. We have a first-year person taking Accounting 200 and 300. We have a second-year person taking Accounting 300. We have a third-year person taking Accounting 400. So one of the exercises that's to be turned in would involve using pivot table to spot some type of anomaly. And we're not going to do a lot of this in this first assignment, but if you wanted a graphic representation, right, you could go insert, pivot chart, and you get a choice of a bunch of different kinds of charts and things. But we could display data graphically. And this is actually like a pivot table. Notice these little items can be changed. And so, you know, what this would show us is that for all students in accounting 200, or excuse me, probably works better this way, right? If I switch it. In accounting 200, it's mostly second-year students, but the blue represents a first-year student, so we could see just a little bit of that, right? In accounting 300, it's mostly third-year students, but there are some second and first-year students also. So. Or another way to think of this is, what are first-year students taking? Most of them are taking accounting 100, but here's some in 200, here's some in 300, right? So by playing with the options, we can do quite a bit. Okay with that? Yeah. So I'm going to